and we're going to be getting started in just a couple of minutes. In the meantime, I want to give you an opportunity to um, think about any questions that you have related to lockdowns and how they've impacted you on your campus in the past. Whether it's a real lockdown that perhaps was handled perfectly or for some may not have been handled perfectly, or a drill that you've done in the past. We'll also invite you throughout this conversation, and particularly right now, to share any of those stories or experiences with us so that we can bring them into our conversation today. Again, thank you so much for being here with us. We'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, and we'll get started here in just a few more moments. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We know how incredibly valuable your time is this early on in the school year, and we appreciate that you're taking this time to be here talking with us and hearing from us. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, and in the meantime, I want to give you a quick opportunity to share any stories that you have from previous lockdowns, whether they're real or drill, successes or challenges, and throughout the conversation today, we'll incorporate those in, both those that have been incredibly successful and those challenges. Ironically, lockdowns are one of the most difficult drills to do, even though we actually are only going inside. And that tends to be something that's relatively easy in and of itself. That said, of course, when we add the added pressure and challenge of responding to an emergency, they can become more challenging. And so I'll invite you to share with us any questions, stories, challenges that you've had in the past. And of course, we don't want to leave out those successes. For any of you that have had incredible success managing or responding to an emergency on campus, please share that as well. We'll give just a couple of more folks just a couple of more moments to join us, and then we'll get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. Today we're talking about movement restriction and the concepts that are involved in lockdown and shelter in place and secure campus and how exactly you respond to those various types of emergencies. My name's Chris, and I'm the founder and CEO of Joffe Emergency Services, a school safety company that was truly organically grown out of need and necessity and our work with schools. We're excited to today work not only in the Southern California market where we were founded, but also in the Northern California market and in the entire East Coast, or on the entire East Coast. Today with us we have Caitlin Roberts, one of our school safety consultants, who has spent a great deal of time evaluating and looking at exactly how schools respond to and manage human-made disasters or emergencies. And so we're excited to be able to talk through movement restriction. For those of you that have been with us throughout the series, you know how important your questions are to us. And so throughout the conversation today, if you have questions that come up or you have specific challenges that are unique to your school or to your campus or even your larger community, please feel free to share those with us. And those that we can answer on the webinar, we will, and any that we can't for any reason, whether they're too unique or too specific or anything else for that matter, we'll reach out to you separately after the webinar to make sure that we can answer those questions for you. That said, feel free to share those with us in the question panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. Without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Caitlin, who will get us started and talk us through movement restriction today. So welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. My name is Caitlin. Again, just like Chris said, I work up here in the Northern California area with a lot of our schools, and throughout the beginning of this year, I've noticed a lot of need for training and practice with lockdowns, which is why I'm really excited to join you guys today and do this webinar. So to start off the day, just the program today, again, welcome registration. We are going to be talking about the evolution of the school lockdown. As we've grown and kind of learned about the lockdown scenario, our approaches to it have changed, so we are going to be talking about that today. We'll be talking about how to understand and deliver this information to your faculty. We are also going to give you a quick update on Joffe's programs and how we actually work with our schools out here and all over the United States. We're going to end out the day today with a roundtable discussion too. We want to talk about what you guys have done with your schools. We're going to talk about how we have helped our schools here with Joffe. So again, just like Chris said, if you have any questions, concerns, you want to talk about your challenges and the things that you have done with your schools, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that panel. Just shoot over your questions, and we'll talk about those today. I apologize, everybody. We're having some technical difficulties. Just bear with me just a moment while we figure out what's going on. After today, hopefully, you guys will be able to identify the 3 different types of lockdown scenarios that we work with schools. You're going to learn how to approach your staff in an appropriate manner. Lockdowns are scary. We've grown up doing these fire and earthquake drills. They're almost routine to us at this point because we've practiced them so much. But these lockdowns are a fairly new concept, which is very intimidating for us to think about. Although they are intimidating, lockdowns are ever more important with our community today, and it's important that we train our faculty on the importance of them, but not scare and intimidate them with this information. You're also going to understand how the Joffe process goes. How do we work with our schools? How do we prepare them for the events? We provide trainings, we support them with practice, and we help them prepare for that worst case scenario. To start off the day, we are going to talk about the evolution of the lockdown. You'll notice that as we have come to understand the lockdown scenario, the universal approach to lockdowns has actually changed. We've separated the word lockdown into 3 different scenarios. We now refer to them collectively as movement restriction, so you'll hear me referring to movement restriction today rather than the word lockdown itself. Throughout the discussion today, we're going to explore said changes and how they may impact you and your school community. Let's talk a little bit about those changes in the approach that I was mentioning before. So before, we used to have a more passive approach to lockdowns. Basically, run, hide, and wait for backup. This is great, but this is only half of it. We want to avoid having our schools being, for lack of a better term, sitting ducks, which is why we've now moved into a more active approach if that passive approach fails. Now, what we've added to our passive approach to make it more active is fight. Put differently, you're to run, hide, wait for backup, but if all of those fail, you're to fight for your life. We'll delve deeper into that in just a moment when we talk about our different levels of movement restriction. The second major evolution with these lockdowns is our change to the approach of it, which is we used to lock down for all possible threats, no matter the degree of the seriousness. Sometimes a hard lockdown is not always the right solution to the situation at hand, which is why now we've actually identified those 3 different levels of movement restriction, which I was talking about before. The first being a secure campus, secondly, a shelter in place, and finally, that hard lockdown that you've heard me referring to a couple of times before. These levels vary based on the situation at hand. Identifying these 3 different levels of movement restriction has, rather than lumping them all together as just lockdowns, has actually helped to reduce some of the anxiety and stress associated with the actual term lockdown. Before we get moving along, talking about these different levels of movement restriction today, I want to get a quick poll from you guys. You'll see it pop up on your screen in just a second. How confident do you feel with the movement restriction procedures that your organization has in place? we need help ASAP, we need some work, but ours definitely works, or we're so good, Joffe should use us as an example. I'll give you guys just a minute to vote for that. Okay, great. So it looks like about 88% of you guys have voted. We'll just give you a couple more seconds to get those votes in. We're up to 94. All right, great. So it looks like most of you guys are in that kind of zone. We need some work, but we could definitely use some help. We're going to change that for you guys today. We'll delve into these different levels of movement restriction that I keep mentioning. But first, I just want to talk a little bit about personal safety. It seems kind of silly, but it's something that we at Joffe always like to mention, stress, and cover with any safety-related topic that we talk about. Your personal safety, and second, the safety of your students, is the most important thing. Think about it this way. If you yourself are not safe, you cannot help the situation, you can't help your colleagues or your students. That being said, we always want to ensure that we take an approach that will maximize the possibility of a safe outcome for everybody involved. There are 3 different levels of movement restriction, like I've referred to before, so let's actually talk about those. First, we have secure campus. That's the first level. Then we have the second level, which would be a shelter in place. And finally, we have the lockdown, or the hard lockdown. To start things off, we're going to talk about that first level of movement restriction called the secure campus. We may want to consider a secure campus when there's a possible threat in the area, but no imminent threat actually on our campus. Now, this may seem like a little bit of a silly example, but bear with me, it'll all make sense in just a second. Say we have a teacher. They left campus for lunch. On their way back in, they notice a huge swarming colony of bees at a park very close nearby the school. A swarming colony of bees nearby your school may be cause for a secure campus because it's dangerous. Bees are venomous. If you were to be exposed to a huge swarm of bees, lots of stings can seriously injure you. And that's not even to mention many people nowadays are allergic to bees, to which this is a concern and a potential reason that you would want to secure your campus. Actions to take when you want to secure your campus is 1, secure the perimeter. No on or off privileges. Going back to that bee example, we don't want any of our people, any of our students, our faculty, our staff leaving the campus and potentially entering a dangerous situation. On the other side of that, we don't want anybody entering the campus that may potentially attract and lead that swarm of bees onto or inside the campus. Since this situation is being dealt with outside of the campus, you may continue with your normal activities within your campus. Basically, you would enact a secure campus to ensure that whatever's going on outside your campus just stays outside. That being said, you must always prepare for a change in the situation. If for some reason the swarm of bees were to make it onto your campus, you may think about upgrading your movement restriction. That leads me into our second level, which would actually be a shelter in place. Usually, when talking about a shelter in place, we're referring to an environmental hazard that may cause an imminent threat to the campus. Although I love my bee scenario, I have a more realistic example of a situation that actually happened to one of our schools up here in the Northern California area. We have a school out located in the foothills of Marin, dead center in the middle of a residential area. At the end of the school year last year, a gas line in this residential area actually burst, and it let gas leak into the air that was in this neighborhood where the school is located. Now, if a situation like this were to happen to you and your school, the actions that you would need to take would be the following. Again, first and foremost, you must secure the perimeter. No ins or outs. You don't want anybody leaving your campus and entering a potentially dangerous situation. Again, you don't want to open up your doors and allow somebody in because that could be potentially exposing your school to whatever's going on outside. Here's where that level up in our action plan happens from that secure campus. You also want to ensure that your classrooms and offices are secured as well. This is especially important for schools that have a primarily outside campus, meaning that their classroom and office doors open directly to the outside. That being said, I still want to stress the importance that even schools that are mainly inside campuses should seal their classrooms and offices. Inside meaning that most of their classrooms and offices are inside one main building that can be secured from one location. Another incredibly crucial step to dealing with shelter-in-place situations is to ensure that your HVAC system be shut down ASAP. With this gas leak scenario that I was talking about that happened up here in Northern California, it was imperative that they shut down that HVAC system because gas was leaking into the air around the school in the neighborhood, and that HVAC system would filter that air through their system and right into their classrooms. Had they not shut that system down, any gas, and for that matter any other toxins that were in the air at that point, they could be directly funneled right into their classrooms, offices, or if this was an inside building, it could be filtered into their building as well. And finally, since we're dealing mostly with environmental issues when we're talking about a shelter in place, movement within your campus is still okay. However, as with all movement restriction scenarios, we must be prepared for a change in the situation. Moving along, I'd like to talk about the third and most serious movement restriction scenario, which would be the hard lockdown, or the lockdown, either or. We will call a hard lockdown or a lockdown for any direct or imminent threat that is on your school's campus. This can either be someone with a weapon, an unknown person who has not checked in with the front office, even an irate parent or guardian that's causing a direct threat to your students, staff, and faculty. Just a side note about calling for a lockdown, unless your school decides otherwise, any staff or faculty member that has a reasonable suspicion about a potentially dangerous situation on a school campus should feel confident to call a hard lockdown. Most schools either have a code word or phrase, i.e. At Joffe we could say Joffe Emergency Services, Joffe Emergency Services 3 times, which means that we're going to go into a hard lockdown. Or some schools decide that simply stating this is a hard lockdown, please proceed accordingly is sufficient enough. You can decide with your school or organization what is the best for you. So now what? A hard lockdown's been called. What are we supposed to do? Your action plan is going to be that, for one, you must take shelter immediately in the first classroom, office, or less ideally, but bathroom that you can find. You don't want to directly head for a bathroom, but if you find yourself in a situation where all of the classrooms and offices have already been locked down, that's where you can go as well. On your way into that classroom or office, grab anyone and everyone that you can, and ensure that once that door closes behind you, it becomes locked and it stays locked, meaning the door opens for no one until a designated person comes to release the class and lift that actual lockdown. Again, like secure campus and shelter in place, we want to ensure that our campus, classrooms, and offices are completely secure. No on or off privileges, no in or out. Once that door is closed and once the door is locked, it stays locked. Now we're inside the classroom, the door is locked, what do? We like to use the phrase, get dark, get quiet. Basically meaning you need to close the blinds, silence your phones, dim the screens on your phones, instruct your students that there's to be no talking, and to huddle together in the corner in the least visible area possible. You're going to stay here until one of two possible things happens. Either help arrives, the police have come and they've handled the situation, and the lockdown has been lifted. Or two, your passive approach has failed, and God forbid this unknown or dangerous person has gained access to your hiding spot. This is where our approach has slightly changed. Consider that active approach if your passive approach does not work. Put differently, if a dangerous person gains access to your hiding area, fight for your life. Attack this person, not necessarily physically, but you can use the things that are around you. Throw staplers and chairs and desks and hole punchers, whatever you can get your hands on. Fire extinguishers are great ones. You can blast them with a fire extinguisher. You can even throw it at them. This is a scary concept and completely reasonable that most of you are probably thinking, what the heck is this lady thinking telling me to attack this person? However, if you completely inundate this unknown person with a litany of arsenal that I just listed above, the chances of disarming them and creating a scenario where you and your students can escape greatly increases. Now, I've just thrown a whole bunch of information about you about all these different movement restriction type scenarios. We have that secure campus, the shelter in place, and the lockdown. I'd like to do a quick stats check with you guys. How many of you guys have not conducted a lockdown drill with your students on campus? You guys will see a pop-up on your screen in just a second, so we can get some stats on you guys. Almost there. It looks like we have about 82% of you guys. We'll give you a couple more seconds to wrap that up, and then we'll take a look. Okay. So it looks like about 86% of you guys performed those lockdowns 1 to 4 times a year, which is great. We'll talk about that in just a second.
And Caitlin, I'll pause you for just a moment. And Caitlin made an incredible point earlier that I just want to reinforce and share a story about. When we talk about lockdowns and we talk about, again, not shelter in place, not secure campus, but the true lockdown, and we look at a potential threat that is on campus or a perceived threat that is on campus or very close to campus. One of the things that Caitlin said earlier is that any staff member, any adult on campus should be able to announce that lockdown unless your school has a different policy or procedure for one reason or another. Now, I'll challenge you, if your school has a procedure in place that doesn't allow anyone to announce a lockdown, to review that this year and to review that quickly. Because one of the things that we've identified over the course of the last several years is that lockdowns are very fluid. They're very dynamic situations, and our response to them has to be just the same, fluid and dynamic. And that means that if somebody's faced with an on-campus threat, a parent that's very, very upset, or a custody battle where the wrong parent shows up to pick up the child and is escalated and threatening to take the child right now. Any of those situations don't fall into the sort of easy and not so fluid category of our regular drills, where perhaps the front desk is the one to announce the lockdown, or we have our pre-recorded message that is all set up in our emergency notification system and goes out at 10:03 as soon as the drill happens. They challenge us to respond dynamically and from the classroom or from the office or from the hallway or frankly from wherever we are. A couple of years ago, I had one of the best examples of this ever, and if you've heard me speak before, you're more than likely heard this story. But long story short, there was a police pursuit that began in one part of the city and moved to another part of the city, and it ended directly in front of one of our schools. And the driver of the car that the police were pursuing stepped out of the vehicle, turned around, and fired at the police, fired a weapon at the police. And coincidentally, in front of the school was the director of security. And it was through no intent or knowledge or anything else, frankly. It was just pure coincidence and happenstance and, frankly, some good luck. And she observed this all happen. She observed the weapon being fired. And she brought her two hands to the front of her face and she yelled at the top of her lungs, "Lockdown." And those actions alone empowered and enabled the school to get into a lockdown position far faster than any of the technology that they had available and far more efficiently than attempting to locate a radio or activate the emergency notification system or strobe lights. And this is a school that we had worked with at this point for several years. They had a lot of that equipment, a lot of that stuff available to them. But even better than that and even more accessible than that was simply the human voice. And so challenge yourselves to really evaluate whether or not, A, you're ready for anybody on campus to announce a lockdown, and then B, whether or not you feel that anybody on campus, and again, this really should be geared towards adults, is actually empowered enough to yell lockdown and actually feels the confidence and knows how to do so. And I would even challenge you to practice it. This year, at the beginning of the year, when we do all of our back-to-school safety in-service time with all of our schools, frankly nationwide, we asked each group that we interacted with to yell lockdown at the top of their lungs collectively. And we inadvertently locked down a couple of schools in doing so. But we also were able to ensure that every single person on that campus, every single adult on that campus, at least once had taken the opportunity to raise their two hands up to their face and to yell it at the top of their lungs. And perhaps just them doing it that one time and then doing it throughout the year as we come back and sit with them again in staff and faculty meetings will empower them and remind them that they too can bring their hands to their face and yell at the top of their lungs, "Lock down," if that's what they need to do. So again, I'll give you that to mull over and to think about, but remember that your adults on your campus are really your allies. They're your support system. They're your network of people that can get involved and engaged early on in the situation. So empower them so that they can be responsive and so that they can make a change. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Caitlin.
Thank you, Chris. That's a great story, and I'm sure a lot of you guys at home are able to pull from that. Just moving back to our stats check, just a tidbit of information for you guys. So again, about, I think 86% of you guys or so perform these drills 1 to 4 times a year. Now, although there was only about 7% of you guys that said, what's a lockdown drill? I've never done that before. I want to gear this towards you guys. Just a tidbit of information for you about what happens to most people in the event of an emergency. Almost never do we actually react the way that we would think one would in the event of an emergency. They're scary. We become scatterbrained and forget everything that we told ourselves we were actually supposed to do. One way to divert this type of reaction from your teachers is to train, and practice, practice, practice. Ingraining what they're supposed to do in the event of a lockdown into their brains gives them some sort of information, a guideline, if you will, to fall back on in the event that their brain becomes mashed potatoes during this actual event. Just like with the school that Chris just mentioned, we trained with them, we practiced with them. That's why in the event of this actual lockdown, all of technology happened to fail, and she diverted back to, I just got to get the note out there that we have to lock down. And she used her first instinct, which was to use her voice. Again, lockdowns, new concept, you must train, you must practice, and you must prepare for them. Now that now that I've just ingrained in your brains at home the importance of training and practicing, let's talk a little bit about how to deliver this information to your faculty. I know I'm throwing these poll questions at you, but they're great to kind of gauge how you guys are training and working with your schools. I have another poll question. How often do you run these movement restriction trainings with your staff each year? Or do you feel a need to increase the amount of training and knowledge of these movement restrictions amongst your organization? Definitely, we didn't even know there's 3 types of movement restriction. The second would be we could do some more training to ease the anxiety surrounding it, or we've got a fantastic handle on the movement restriction. I'll give you guys just a second. Almost there. Looks like we have about 70% of you guys. I'll give you guys another 30 seconds or so and we'll wrap it up. Okay. Let's, all right, so looks like about 50% of you guys, we could do some more training to ease that anxiety. Definitely, we didn't even know there was 3 types of movement restriction. It's about the other 40%. And it looks like a couple of you guys have a fantastic handle on that movement restriction, which is awesome. This leads us right into our discussion about knowing your faculty and staff. Since this is such a stressing and kind of anxiety-filled topic, you must tailor your discussion to the needs of your faculty. If the topic or the delivery of the actual content becomes too stressing, the likelihood of your staff and faculty just tuning everything out is really high. No one likes to talk about these things. They're not the most fun topics to cover, unless you work for Joffe. We love talking about this stuff. But finding ways to deliver this incredibly important information to your staff and faculty is really, really important. The number one rule for teaching in general, so I'm sure most of you at home are already familiar with this, is the fact that you need to read and gauge your audience that you're speaking to. For example, and that's speaking from personal experience as well, rather than using words and phrases like bomb threat or active shooter, modify your speech. Talk about the bad person or the unknown person or the unsafe situation on campus. The likelihood of your staff being more receptive and responsive greatly increases without the use of those, for lack of a better term, trigger phrases. As soon as they hear active shooter or they hear bomb threat or things like that, a lot of people just tune it out. Oh, nope, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to hear it. So if you modify your speech and you don't use those trigger phrases, they tend to be more receptive to the actual overall content delivery. In my personal experience as well, I've found that involving your teachers and your staff and your faculty in the discussion is imperative. Basically, when running one of these trainings, I'll start out by presenting the protocol and follow up with an open For one, it creates somewhat of a safe zone. Your teachers feel safer pinging ideas off of each other, learning from the questions and concerns that their colleagues may have. Having that open forum somewhat creates like a camaraderie of sorts between them all. This scary concept, they all have to learn about it together. It allows them to form a bond and helps their community of teachers support one another while they're learning. Open forum also creates an atmosphere where one person may be able to ask a question that many have, but they're just too afraid to ask or address. And finally, with all of this information given, you must take it slowly. Like I've been mentioning all day, the idea of movement restriction, and more so with lockdowns in particular, it's a very stressing topic to talk about, and it's usually cited with lots of anxiety, questions, concerns, things like that. You can't throw too much information all at once, otherwise they might shut down and not retain it all. Remember, it's a slow process, a yearly project that you must train and update your teachers on regularly. You can't expect to have one training at the beginning of the year and have your teachers fully understand everything that comes into place with lockdowns. As Chris mentioned earlier, lockdowns seem to be the most simple type of movement restriction on paper, right? We're staying inside. We're not doing much. We're kind of waiting until further notice. However, it is the most difficult one for people to get a handle on. So you must train, and this must be a yearly thing for you guys to go through. Moving along, I'd like to talk a little bit about lockdown kits. Just at home, think to your guys' selves, how many of you guys actually have lockdown kits at your school? It may seem kind of a side note, but I promise this will all pull together in just a moment. Lockdown kits are really cool, actually. We set a lot of our schools up with them. They look just like so. They're on your screen. It's a yellow bucket. Inside there, there's water pouches. There's sustenance, food, calorie bars. There's blankets, tape, toilet paper, whistles, radio, and that bucket itself that holds all this stuff actually doubles as a toilet as well. It's pretty cool, and in the sense that we would like to prepare all of our schools for the worst case scenario. When thinking about movement restrictions and or lockdowns, especially when dealing with little kids, we need to think in the long term. Chances are it's not going to get to that point, but you have to prepare for that. Moves me right into talking about Joffe's preparedness in general. For one, we do trainings with our schools, regular trainings. You must get the topic out there. You can't be scared. You have to talk about it. You should have specific protocols that are unique to your school in place for any movement restriction scenario. With Joffe, when we work with our schools, we come in, we help create those protocols that will actually benefit your school in the long haul. Like I mentioned earlier, having something for your teachers to fall back on in the event of that emergency is really important, right? We become mashed potato brains when that emergency happens. If they have that training on paper and those protocols down, they have at least something that they can follow. You have to actually talk to your faculty too. A lot of our schools, what I have noticed is they have these protocols in place, but basically they'll hand the handbook to their teachers and kind of leave it up to them to actually read the protocols and understand them. That's not the most ideal situation. We want you to actually sit down, talk to your faculty, use the techniques we just talked about. Put the information out there, have that open forum, have your teachers address their questions and concerns. With Joffe, we actually hold school-wide trainings to talk about these issues. We confront those concerns that your staff and faculty may have, and we help come up with those solutions that make sense for your particular school. Secondly, we practice. Practice makes perfect. Training your staff and faculty on the proper protocols is great, but they must get actual physical practice in order to understand how to translate the words on paper into actions in real life. It's almost like saying you can give a man a fish and feed him for a day, or you can teach him how to fish and feed him for a lifetime, something like that. You can tell your teachers over and over the protocols. You can give them the handbook and let them do it. But if you don't actually teach them how to do it in real life, they're not actually going to understand. And also, like I mentioned before, in emergencies, you do all sorts of crazy things. You need that backup, that physical practice, so that you've actually done it before, so you understand what you're supposed to do and what your role is during this lockdown. And finally, we have the preparation. You must prepare and equip your schools for a worst-case scenario, which is why I mentioned those lockdown buckets before. Say potentially you're sheltered in place or in a lockdown for 8+ hours. You must have food and sustenance for your students. Plus, it's pretty cool those buckets double as a toilet because you can't actually leave the classroom once you're sheltered in place. This actually is something that can happen. Say, for example, that school we had up here in the Northern California, that gas leak. If they weren't able to contain that gas leak quickly, they would have had to stay sheltered in place for a lot longer than the couple of hours that they were at school. These kind of buckets and or preparedness in general help them get through that. All right. Let's take a break real quick. I'd like you guys to share, what are your top 3 challenges? What are your top 3 strengths? What have you guys experienced here today? And what have you experienced with your schools? Have you guys learned anything new that could help your staff and faculty? There's that panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you guys could just share some info and we'll talk about it if you guys have any questions or concerns.
I can share one of the, as some of your questions and concerns come in, and again, use that panel on the right-hand side of your screen to identify your top 3 strengths, your top 3 challenges. And if you do that for us in the next couple of moments, we'll be able to actually talk through some of them, and you'd be surprised at how common some of the top challenges are. One of the biggest that many of our schools find is that they don't have an opportunity, or they don't have enough opportunity, to incorporate their emergency notification system into their drills. And we talked a little bit about this either last week or the week prior when we spoke specifically about the emergency notification system itself. But lockdown is one of the scenarios that really demands our use of and our testing of an emergency notification system. It's, and really I should say any of the movement restriction responses, right? Shelter in place, secure campus, and or lockdown all demand that we have some type of positive outreach and some type of proactive outreach to our community, because obviously without those, our community can't respond, our community can't do anything. And so bringing the emergency notification system in and utilizing it and bringing it to life, although it can be a really rewarding and positive experience, tends to be one of the biggest challenges because it incorporates your tech side, right, or your business office, depending on who typically sets that up on your campus. It incorporates every single staff and faculty member. If there's something that goes wrong, it might incorporate every student or every parent. And so just the stress alone, not to say that the activity and the structure and all of that isn't challenging enough, but just the stress alone can be overwhelming and daunting, and even talk some folks out of actually using it or doing it. And so I'll say that for many of our schools, and this is true on both coasts, although some things we find are very true for schools on the East Coast and some things are very true for schools on the West Coast, the challenge or the fear of using the emergency notification system in any of these 3 movement restriction scenarios is nationwide. It really does impact everyone and challenge everyone. looks like there are a couple of folks responding, and one of the key challenges here is being allowed to do a lockdown. That's interesting, and not alone, actually. We have a number of schools on both coasts, I would say, that find themselves wanting and preparing and really ready to conduct a lockdown drill or conduct a secure campus or even shelter in place, and struggling to get the approval either from leadership of our own or from the parent community. And at this point, the bulk of the schools that fall into this category also tend to be the most challenging schools to work with. And they're the schools that really reinforce and put forward an open community and a welcoming community and an accessible community as one of their core values and one of the items that oftentimes is even in their mission statement and truly matches who they are. And I'll say that you absolutely are able to manage and to create lockdown scenarios and responses even with a truly open and accessible community. I have a Montessori school in southern Massachusetts that has challenged me to come up with ways to lock down and ways to practice lockdown without actually using those terms. And so you can certainly modify the language that you use, you can modify the types of responses that you use, and you can even, based on your school, your community, and your area, change some of the core components of how you respond to an emergency, so long as you're testing it, so long as you're practicing it, and so long as you're doing it on a regular enough basis that your staff and faculty can remember what they're supposed to do, and frankly, your students can remember what they're supposed to do as well. It looks like there was another question that just came in. If there's a shooter in the building and we have line of sight, should we leave the building or go into a classroom? And it looks like that's from Elizabeth, and that's a great question. It's a challenging one to answer, and when you're interacting with or leading a conversation with your own staff or faculty, it's one that you want to carefully answer and tactfully answer. But in general, if you've got a clear and accessible way out of the building and you've got enough distance between you and the person on campus who is the threat, it's not a bad idea to try and get out. If you've got a shorter route to get to a classroom and get secured behind a closed and locked door that perhaps can then be barricaded and supported, then that may be an even better option for you. So put differently, you want to go somewhere. Efficiency is really your core need at this point, and so if it's more efficient, more quick, and essentially easier for you to get into a classroom behind a closed and locked door, great. And if it's easier and more efficient and all out quicker for you to get outside of the building, then that's even better. The benefit of being outside of the building is that then you can really move throughout the campus. But of course, the benefit to being in the classroom, if it's closer, is just that it's closer. So that sort of depends on the exact situation, but really a classroom and or getting out would be good options. I would go with the faster of the two and the easier of the two. Great question. And Caitlin, I'll turn it back over to you for the key points.
All right. So thank you, Chris, for that. I appreciate that. So just a follow-up from today before we wrap up. We were able to discuss those 3 different types of lockdown scenarios. We talked about that secure campus. Remember that swarming colony of bees, right? We talked about the shelter in place, which is generally that environmental hazard. We had that school with the gas line that burst, where they had to shelter in place. And then we also talked about that actual hard lockdown, where we have a dangerous person or an unsafe situation on campus, and you actually have to do that lockdown. We talked about different ways that you can approach your staff. Just, again, keep in mind, lockdowns are scary. We've grown up doing those earthquake and fire drills. They're routine for us, but lockdowns are fairly new. So I have found with a lot of trainings that we've done with our staff, this is the one where there's lots of questions, lots of concerns, lots of anxiety, and you have to understand how to approach your staff in an appropriate manner. And we kind of talked to you a little bit about how Joffe works with our schools. We provide those trainings for our schools. We support them by practicing, and we help prepare them for the worst case scenario. We're problem solvers. That's what we're there for. We help figure out things that are unique for their schools. um, I would just like to end off the day too with a couple of points here. There is a survey online. It's a SurveyMonkey. If you guys would like to fill that out, it helps us learn what you guys learned from today. It helps us learn the types of things that you would like to see from us and what have you. So there's a link there if you guys would like to fill that out. That would be great. Also, if you guys have any particular questions, you can always email your questions to schools, that's schools, at joffeeemergencyservices.com. We have somebody who monitors it all day, every day, and we'll be able to answer any of those questions if you have a unique question that you just didn't feel like asking today, or something that doesn't even pertain to the lockdowns today, something that pertains to one of our other webinars that we had. That'll be open for you guys as soon as we wrap up here today. And last but not least, we have a complimentary gift for you guys as well for attending this webinar today. If you follow this link, you can do actually a school safety assessment. If you need help interpreting that, we are here to help you interpret that. It is actually a $500 value, so thank you for joining us today, and that is our gift to you. And last but not least, I'd like to just wrap up the day and thank all of you guys for actually coming out and listening to us and talking through this with us. Lockdowns again and movement restriction are interesting and dynamic topics that you must train on. So thank you for being proactive and actually coming out and listening to our webinar today. Again, if you have any extra questions, just shoot those over to schools at Joffe Emergency Services. And stay in touch with us. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great day.